Hello, welcome to the May 8th, 2026 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you've not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can ask questions in the live chat field or send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer questions in a real-time manner may soon not be possible with the number of questions that come in. We will go through all of the questions chronologically as asked. So if you don't get to see an immediate response to your question, if you could avoid asking the same question repeatedly, that would be appreciated. Just kind of slows down the whole process. We should have an index of all topics that are discussed in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field several hours after the live stream. So and that allows you to quickly navigate to the various topics that are discussed. If you wanted to search for topics that have been discussed in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. And we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating that website. We have two individuals that serve as moderators on the live stream, Jazz Dude and Agent K. They're not Steinberg employees. They do this to make it a better community experience. We want to give our special thanks to them. And we'll extend an additional round of gratitude to Jazz Dude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, which is a great source of information that is relevant for the Steinberg community, different templates, presets, articles, YouTube links. So check that out. It's a great resource of information. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America, and I primarily focus on Steinberg products. And I'm the host today. I'm presenting from just outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And with that, we will go ahead and begin. Just one quick programming note. I will have to do a door code training for school on next Friday during our normal live stream time. So once again, we won't have a live stream on the 15th. We'll have our normal live stream on Tuesday. And then, so that would be the 12th, and then we'll resume with the regular calendar starting on the 19th. So no live stream next Friday, 1 week from today. All right, so we see Taylor from Music for World Peace Records. Says I sent a video with an issue via email and was hoping to see a reply in the last Hangout, but it wasn't there. I got my issue with Activation Manager resolved. See next message for lingering issue. So I don't see another message from you. I know that was sent a couple hours ago, Taylor. But I don't see the message. So maybe if you want to email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, that would be helpful. I could get it for Tuesday's live stream if you don't make it in today. All right, Zephaniah asks, hey Greg, in my audio performance window, the ASIO Guard peaks at the beginning of the session. How can I fix that? How can I fix that? This is something that just started happening using Pro 13 on PC. So sometimes you may have like an ASIO spike, as we're trying to do. Let's come over to load up kind of a larger project here. So sometimes when all the information, all the plugins, some of the plugins may be read-ahead plugins if you have it in your system. But let's say if I have kind of a large project here and we open up the audio performance monitor. Okay, so you see that kind of sometimes as you start, depending on the plugins that are using, like sometimes if we have a plugin that's maybe more of a look ahead type of plugin. So let's come over here to our mix console and let's say on. So we get an idea of what our CPU load is here, or audio performance load. So pretty minimal, but let's say depending on a particular project, or if you have it in a template, and let's say we have a multi-band compressor. Right. And let's say we put this into, we'll take it out of live mode. So when we kind of first start playing our project and we open up our performance, and we'll just open up a couple of these. All right, so now when we play, we may see more of the ASIO Guard spike. So often it could be doing a lot of work at the front of, for plugins or look ahead for like dynamics processing. So you may see a little spike at the front, but just kind of see what the overall real-time performance versus ASIO Guard. Now, another thing that could affect the ASIO Guard performance is if tracks are set for like record enable. So when I come over here, let's say if I take all of the drum tracks and we put, let me assign a bus to all of these tracks here. Okay. All right, let me just design these here. So, with the ASIO Guard, what it's often going to do is just to so now that these tracks are record enabled, and let's say you may notice that the ASIO Guard could also have an impact when there's more tracks that are record enabled, so that might make a difference in the performance meter. But see if it's playing back fine. And I would say if it's playing back fine, not to worry about it so much. So if you just see it visually peak, but everything is playing back, so maybe make sure that some tracks aren't. If you have tracks that are record enabled, try taking those off, and that should relieve the ASIO Guard because it's not looking to do the hybrid dual buffering to lower the latency on the record enabled tracks or monitored tracks. All right, so we see Klaus joining from Malmo. We have Stefan joining from Sweden as well. We see Jazz Dude on. Always great to have him on. Appreciate everything you do, Jazz Dude. We see Uno Momento from Finland. We have Peter checking in from Montreal. We have Adam Langford joining from the UK. All right, wonderful to see Walter Blackledge from St. Louis Club Cubase. Hope you're well. Great to see you back on. We have VS Terra Nova joining from Amsterdam. All right, so we see Jay the Jolly says hello from southern Denmark, Potato Country. Hope you're well. Thanks a lot for all the help last stream. Happily jamming with Cubase for real now. So that's great, and thanks for joining us back. See Jazz Dude posting a link for the latency mod. This is a great utility for isolating potential hardware conflicts. All right, Jay the Jolly says, I'm curious, other DAWs sometimes have resample options in export windows like 2-point linear to 512-point sync, but not Cubase, different rendering algorithm. So a lot of times when we may not, I think we tried to make sure that the algorithms don't need to be resampled within the audio engine. But one of the things that you could do inside of Cubase that may not be available in others, is to actually export not only with different sample rates, but also, so of course we could do our different sample rates, but we could also do 32-bit float export as well as 64-bit. So if you have an audio interface that does 32-bit integer conversion, so like some of the Steinberg UR, the Steinberg AXR has 32-bit integer and not 24-bit converters, but 32-bit. At that point, you could actually do your full mix, and most of the plugins, I think all of the plugins that come with Cubase will have 64-bit precision, so you could actually export as 64-bit. So while I may not be doing kind of resampling, that's often kind of masking other issues, but you could have kind of the full resolution when exporting 64-bit floating point in terms of bit depth as well. So we haven't had any complaints with the export quality from Cubase. All right, so we see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas. He says he's back, so great to see you on, Michael. All right, John Costigan says hello and thanks to everyone who makes the Hangout go. And he wants everyone to hit the like button. All right, so we have Mohammed Dwalid says, how are you, my great friend? Is the basic M4 enough for orchestral music distribution, or do you recommend memory higher than 16 gigabytes? If you're going to be working with a lot of orchestral libraries, having more memory is always a good thing. 16 gigabytes is kind of like, I would say, the minimum. I know that memory this year in 2026 is, and along with SSD drives have gone up in price pretty significantly. 16 gigs is kind of where I feel, that you could, like your operating system could take about 8 gigs of memory. So the more that you can have in terms of memory, you could obviously get some work done. If you're, doing primarily audio, for orchestral work, I would say you have no problem playing lots of tracks back, but having more memory, if you're dealing with, a several hundred like orchestral sample library instruments as a buffer would always be helpful. So if you could jump up to 32 gigs, if you're going to be doing a lot of MIDI orchestration using sample libraries. My machine I'm using currently on the live stream is 64 gigs. My PC that I use in my studio, I have 128 gigs, and I tend not to have any problems. I would say that if you invested more memory in your computer, so I know it's a cost difference between 16 gigs and 32 gigs, but that could also mean an extra year to 18 months of longevity that computer would give you over a computer that has, less memory. As Jazz Dude mentioned, if you convert, all of your MIDI to audio quickly through render in place, that you could probably squeeze by and get some and work with lower amounts of memory on your system. All right. All right, so we see Uno Memento giving Michael Teams a Heineken 0.0%. All right, so we see Captenergy Music on from Pennsylvania. Thanks for joining. And Michael Teams has given Uno Memento 1 gallon of cookie two-step ice cream. You see Jazz Dude just mentioning that Native Instruments was sold to In Music, have you heard? So I figured it was going there because I think In Music or Akai was making all of the MIDI controllers for native instruments. So I figured that there was already an existing relationship. So I hope it works out. Acquisitions and transitions are always tricky and tough, but I hope everything works out for both companies. Okay, so we see from Jay the Jolly says, speaking of memory, as someone who rarely uses more than between 8 and 24 mixer tracks and a maximum of 5 effects, and in each instrument track, and go to 4 effect channels. Link to 32 gigabytes of RAM is plenty. So yeah, so some instruments, like if you're doing Pad Shop, which is doing like granular synthesis, that could be more intense on probably your on your central processing unit, so your CPU, whereas when you're streaming like lots and lots of orchestral libraries, that's when having like an SSD drive and extra memory could be beneficial. It doesn't necessarily take as much processing power from the CPU, but more kind of just getting through the bottleneck of memory on your system. So all right, so we see Roland Stuff checking in from Sussex, England. Says, hope you're keeping well. Just got to cut the grass, then I'll be back to join in the Cubase creativity. I think I'm going to cut the grass after the live stream before dinner tonight myself. So all right, we see that Captain Energy Music. We see 1 gallon of Black Forest Cake Ice Cream. Let me clear my throat real quick. All right, so Jazz Dude shared a little video on CPU performance versus real-time performance. I think I've watched that one. It's a good explanation. All right, so we see Tim Weinheimer joining from Mission Viejo, California. Just says, hello, Cubasers. Welcome to the party. All right, let me jump to a question that we had mailed in advance. All right, so we see how to record audio files at multiple bit depths in a single project. So if you want like a 16-bit, a 24-bit, a 32-bit file, all within the same project. All right, so let's come over here. So I've just labeled a couple of tracks here as 16-bit, 24-bit, 32-bit. So with Cubase, we can have multiple audio file bit depths within the same project. So it could be a 16, 20, 24, 32, 64-bit floats, all that information. So multiple audio file bit depths, but one common sample rate. So let's say if we want to record a 16-bit, a 24-bit, 32-bit file. So during the questioner asked, do I have to put like a dither plugin on my input channel? So to do this, so we don't have to do that. And the bit depth is going to be set within the particular project settings. So project setup. So we'll come over here to your project menu to project setup, or we could hit Shift plus the letter S as in setup. And let's say, okay, I want to record 16-bit audio. So as I go to record here, just mute that. So let me just set an input bus here. Okay, so we're going to record a 16-bit file because we have our project, the record file format here currently set to 16-bit. All right, so this audio file should be named 16-bit. So we'll come here and hit record. Okay, so I'm going to select the track that's labeled 24-bit. Let's go back to our project setup. Again, project menu to project setup, and we hit Shift plus S. And let's change our bit depth for record file format to 24-bit. And we'll record on this track. Okay, and we'll come over here. Let's again Shift plus S. We'll switch this to 32-bit integer. Okay, so as we record now on this track, okay, so when I select each of the events here, we can see that this is a 44.1. That's our project. So let's go to our pool window. So I'm going to hit Control or Command plus the letter P. All right, so we see our 16-bit file here. And when we look at it, we can see our 16-bit file as we scroll over, that the information for the file is showing that it is a 16-bit file. When we switched the project setup to be 24-bit, again, we look at the file that we recorded in a 24-bit, the track label 24-bit. That's going to be a 24-bit file, and our 32-bit file that we set is recorded as a 32-bit. So these are all playing the same sample rate. Again, we have one common sample rate, but multiple audio file bit depths within a particular project right here like this. So to change it, go to your project menu, to project setup, and just change the bit depth under the record file format settings. Okay. You can see Tim Weinheimer's received 1 gallon of amaretto chocolate ice cream. All right, we have Tony Trunzo joining from Australia. Thanks for being online with us. All right, so we have Sway TV Recording Studios. Great to see you back. I believe, if my memory is right, it's from New Jersey. All right, so we have Sir N68 as Soren from Sweden. All right, let's go to next question that we had mailed in. Can I renumber markers or cycle markers so that they are in order? They are numbered in the order that they appear in the project. Okay, so let's say if I come over, I put in some markers here. So let's say I put in marker 1, I put in a second marker, a third marker, and let's say I put in a fourth marker, a fifth marker, and a sixth. But we can see that these particular markers aren't in numerical order from the start of the project to the end of the project. So if we wanted to change the number ID of the markers so that they go chronologically in number as well as chronologically in order to match, what we could do is we could select our marker track. Let's click right here. We'll open up our marker window, and we will see under the functions menu here, we could say reassign position marker IDs. So you see again, this is marker 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we'll choose reassign the marker IDs. And now you can see that the markers have been renumbered, where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if I put, let's say, marker 7 in here, marker 8, marker 9, marker 10, 11, 12, to change the order of the markers as they appear, you could hit Shift plus M, or Command M to open up the marker window, and then go to the functions and reassign position marker ID. So you could do that for cycle markers or for markers in the project. All right. So, see, question from Jay the Jolly says, you mentioned being from Yamaha. Yamaha owns Steinberg, right? Are there combos of Yamaha and Steinberg products that work especially well together? Yeah, so Steinberg has been part of the Yamaha family since 2005. So I worked for Steinberg previous to that. And then when Yamaha acquired them, I transitioned to working for Yamaha Corporation of America, which is the American or the United States distributor of Yamaha products. But I primarily focus on, directly with on Steinberg products for the most part. There is a lot of deep integration between the two companies. So there was a series of Yamaha branded hardware. So it started off in 2008 with the Yamaha MR series, which is Firewire based systems. We also jointly worked on the UR series and AXR series of audio interfaces. The audio interfaces now have switched from Steinberg branding to Yamaha branding, and Steinberg is really going to be focused solely on software, I think, from the future. Some of the other products that we have worked together on extensively were kind of a controller called a CC121, which has kind of a new counterpart called a Yamaha CC1, which is kind of a single motorized channel fader with 12 Stream Deck buttons, so that you could customize the particular functionality of the button. So each button has its own display. We also worked very closely on a high-end controller that was kind of more Nuendo specific called Nuage. We do lots of work with the Yamaha digital consoles for recording. So Yamaha, we have a Nuendo Live version, which is specifically integrated works with any console, but there's unique workflow tie-ins to like Yamaha Rivage consoles and DM7, DM3. So there's tracking. We also do software called VST Rack, and VST Rack allows you over a Dante network to run VST3 plugins for live sound applications. So if you're mixing a live concert and you wanted to run the frequency EQ or the reverence reverb, you wanted to run your VST plugins for your live console so you have the studio quality of plugins, you could use VST Rack. We also have developed MixKey, which is kind of a streaming software solution for people doing live streaming, like what we're on now with live streaming, where we could take audio from different sources on your computer and use that for doing like Twitch streams and doing live streams. So we do lots of work where the software is integrated. We also have worked jointly on as part of Halion. You'll see the FM Labs instrument. So we'll just show that quickly. And the FM Labs instrument, obviously Yamaha's kind of been a pioneer in FM synthesis, starting back with the DX7 in 1982. But now, as Yamaha is a pioneer, so if we wanted to come over here, we could go to our Halion engine and say, okay, we want to come over and let's open up FM Lab. So FM Lab is an 8-operator FM synthesis. It could import all of your DX7 SysX patches. So lots of work that we do on instruments, that we do on audio. So lots of great collaboration. So you can think of like when there's software solutions that Yamaha needs, Steinberg provides those particular solutions. All right. And it's great to be in a company that's focused on music. All right, so we see from Soren, just says, thanks for all the info about different bit rates recording, Greg. You're great. Thanks for the great question that you sent in. As we see from Kalote, my Yamaha mixer came with a version of Cubase 10, I think. So yeah, and often when you get a Motif keyboard, there's lots of integrations with Motif and using virtual instruments from Yamaha inside of, inside of Cubase as well. So if you're a Montage user, you get a Montage VSTi that you could run inside of your Cubase. All right. All right, so we see from DJ King LZ, are there any tips and tricks you use for using Media Bay? Is there a way to adjust the playback point of a sample? Okay, so let's say if I'm in Media Bay here, so let's say we're going through different samples. All right, so say if I'm here, let's all right, so I think that we can, let's see if we, so if we just kind of, we could start kind of playing right from there. Now there's a way, let me just see if I get my key command, my modifier right here. So when we click, we could have that. And there is a way, let me just see if I can figure out the larger media bay. So I come over here, let's all right, so if we want, we could also just choose to, so if I just click, we could play from anywhere that we want. So I say, okay, what does this sound like? Or if we stop, I can say play from right there. And there is a way, let me see if I could. So if you hold down the command key, you can just play a portion of the sample. So, and if we wanted that to loop, so we could just kind of come over here, just play that as a loop. And let's say, what would it sound like at half the tempo? And let's see what it is at twice the tempo. Or at normal tempo. And now once I have just that portion of the file, I could just drag that portion of the file directly to the timeline as well. So that way I don't have to drag the whole file. It's only just going to be just that particular portion. So let's see if I think we could mimic that here. So let's say if we want to thought there was a way of doing it there, but if not, you could just grab it from, so if you go from the large media bay, hitting F5, then you can again just click wherever you want to start playing. See if I get that loop, and I think you could do it in the small media bay as well. Let me just but look, well, you can do it in the big one, so you could just loop just a portion. So I want to do like a sub loop. Instead of dragging the whole file, you could just drag that sampled portion over and over again. So lots of cool things that you can do in Media Bay for just kind of, and if you wanted to search, you know, here we could choose like your directory, kind of like your file browser here, and you can say, okay, I'm looking for not just audio files, but MIDI files, MIDI loops, patterns, track presets, plugin presets, FX chain presets, channel strip presets, video files, projects. So you can say, okay, I'm looking for piano, and now it's all your piano. Let's come over here, bass. So you could just kind of search, and so let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, so we see Brian Sawyer joining from Yuma, Arizona. All right, we have DJ King LZ says, my first live stream. Well, welcome. We hope to see you on many more live streams in the future. Tim Weinheimer is just saying that he really likes his Yamaha CC1, really helps with his Cubase workflow. Let's see, Brian DeBear says, I see that in music has acquired native instruments. Wish them the best. It's always difficult to make work. Seems easy at the start. As someone who survived several acquisitions. All right, so we see I will probably buy OmniVocal full version when beta ends. Do you know when that can happen, Greg? So nothing has been announced officially with that. So we'll have to see, you know, OmniVocal is actually developed by Yamaha. So it's not done in-house at Steinberg. So it could be, you know, I can imagine, you know, it could be that there will be different voices, but we're seeing more and more integration, like the ability of being able to control the vibrato with your modulation wheel in real time. So as soon as anything is publicly announced, then I'll make sure to let everyone know. But yeah, I think it's a really great technology. All right, so we see Jay the Jolly says, so the reason we do not really see Yamaha branded VST plugins is because they become Steinberg branded. So you know, there's been a couple of plugins. You know, there was the Rupert Neve plugins that Yamaha did. So Yamaha has a modeling technology called VCM, so it's virtual circuit modeling. And that's what's used on a lot of their high-end consoles. And we did sell plugins of the Rupert Neve Portico EQ and Portico compressor, so the 5033, 5043. That was plugins that were developed by Yamaha, and there were some other plugins. Most of the plugins that Yamaha's developed are designed to work with their large format consoles, where it's kind of a fixed latency. It's going to be kind of optimized for that. So they haven't done a lot of VST plugins. So on the instrument side, if you are a Montage hardware owner, you get access to the Montage plugin. And the Montage plugin itself will allow you to use that inside of Cubase. But, you know, a lot of the sounds that we see in Hallion are developed, you know, originally by Yamaha. Some of the instruments that we see, like Etude Piano, are joint projects between Yamaha and Steinberg on sampling sessions and sound design. So we see a lot of that, but Yamaha is primarily a hardware company. Steinberg, we do lots of different virtual instruments, but for is terms of normal like effect plugins, most of our focus is for those to add value to the Cubase, Nuendo, Wavelab, Dorico experience. So we don't necessarily try to do a separate business model. We just try to make sure that you have amazing quality plugins as part of your package, so that most users will not have to purchase additional like libraries or third-party plugins. So Steinberg does all of their plugins in-house, with a few exceptions, but probably 98% of the plugins that you see that come with Cubase are done in-house. So, and since Steinberg is owned by Yamaha, you could say that they're Yamaha plugins, but it's not like Yamaha's developing them and handing them off to Steinberg. So Steinberg has been doing plugins since 1995, so more than 31 years, and we invented VST, so we kind of know what we're doing with that. All right, so we see, I noticed that the chorus in Cubase can be really wide and still in phase, which is amazing, by the way. So, yeah. All right, so we see I'm using the drum kit, studio kit in this song. I've gotten feedback that the drums need to be beefed up. They sound like toy drums, but it's analog and sampled right. How could I beef it up? All right, so a lot of times, people ears may be used to more ultra processed drums. I think I just did a project for a client this week with that same kit, and they were just ecstatic with it. And like, when I've used it on tracks for like drummers, snob friends of mine, they're like, oh, what's that kit? That one sounds really good. So, but if you had to beef up a kit, I would maybe try going through. So let's take a look. I could probably do like maybe a bit of compression, but probably just I would maybe dial in the envelope shaper plugin. So let me just open. We'll just do a new instrument track. Okay, so we'll come over here to Groove Agent SE. Okay, so let's get to our Studio Kit SE. All right, so just slow the tempo down a little bit. So even if you go to like the mixer here internally, let's get to the master. You could come over here. So let's run, let's say an insert. So let's come over to, I think if we go to dynamics, see, I think we have the envelope shaper. So I'll just come over here. Let's adjust the release. So I'll go ahead and bypass, let's say. So if you want to go from there, and I'll just bring up my control room volume a little bit and just put the envelope shaper on so we could adjust the attack. And if you go to, let's say, under dynamics, go to the auto gain compressor. So you could just come over here and I would maybe put those two plugins on. And you can could adjust the knee. If you want to do like kind of a parallel type of environment. So again, with just those two plugins, I would just, again, come right over here, that you could get those drums beefed up using the internal plugins. You could also use those particular plugins inside of as just normal inserts on a drum track. So, but a lot of times people, if they kind of listen to drums by themselves, if they solo drums, and they go, oh, it sounds really weak, and expect everything to sound strong. But if everything in the mix sounds strong, then nothing in the mix sounds strong. So you need kind of something as a foil, as a kind of a counterpart to that, to make other stuff kind of pop out of the sound. Okay, so we see DJ King LZ says mind blown. All right. See, Soren just says maybe I should switch to electronic drums and get really punchy kick and snappy snare. So interestingly enough, like if we go to the Groove Agent, if we go to like Simon Phillips, so let's say we go to the Simon Phillips Studio Drums, and let's say we want, we'll open up a Simon Phillips Studio Drum Kit here. So let's say if we're playing this, and we'll go to the kit. What's interesting, if you select the kick here, you could actually have different trigger samples. So and you could adjust the levels. So if I go to the kick, we can now just listen through. So now we could blend our different samples are being triggered as well. So a lot of like Groove Agent kits could allow you to do this, but it's many times people are, I remember I think it was Mike Klink, who was the engineer. I could be mistaken on his name. Passed away a number of years ago. And he was going to do a drum sampling CD with a friend of mine before he passed. And he was just talking about, and he did like the drums on AC/DC's Back in Black. And, he said that, all the drums on that record, even though everyone thinks they sound so acoustic, are all like, 5 or 6 samples layered that were being triggered from AMS delay and reverb units as being triggered. So. All right, so we have DJ King LZ, says here in Florida. Let me know what part. I used to rep Florida years ago, so been around the state many times. All right, wonderful to see Jan from Cubase Index on. And we see Jan giving kudos to Jazz Dude for the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. right, so we see from Tim Weinheimer just saying VST3 is great. All right, reading through comments here. All right, and we see that Jan has received 1 gallon of tropical coconut mango ice cream from Michael Teams. All right, so we see from Fox Andrew, hi Greg, can we output the mixer from Groove Agent 6 to Cubase to see all mics, example, snare top, snare bottom, etc., as individual channels, ideally with groups inside, new group folders with channel. So let's take a look. I'll just do a brand new project here. We'll just do like a punch kit here. Okay, so let's say if we're playing just a little. All right, so let's say if we come over to our mixer. Okay, so when I select my kick track, I could see my kick in and kick out mic. So let's say if I'm playing this particular project and we solo the kick. So we have like the room mic that we hear. So let's go ahead and take our room and overhead away. All right. So there's our kick out, kick in that we could adjust. And now let's put it in. Sorry, we'll come here. All right, so I could have my kick out mic here. Kick in. All right, now once I'm here, I could assign this to, let's say, kick out to output 2. Let's put kick in to output 3. And let's come over to, let's say, our snare. So, and again, I could take my snare tracks here. And let me just jump back to okay, so when I come over here, and again, I could say, okay, I want my snare top, snare bottom. Let's say I want more room. So I'll select my snare here. And so now we'll come over here, take this output, let's say to 4. I'll make that output 5. Okay, and let's come over here to output 6. All right, so now when we come over here, you know, we could have our snare top, snare bottom. And again, let's put our kick on. Alright, so let's say, okay, I want my kick out and kick in. Let's put all, let's see if we could add these into. So now if I want to take all these and put them into new folder group, and do more processing on them. But as we can see that so once you kind of click, there's kind of internal groups for the particular kits here for like the acoustic kits, so that again, once you're in the mixer, you can just click on your groups and you can say, okay, I want to see all my kicks, my snares, toms, and auxiliaries. So that could be like your cymbals, but that will give you kind of a control over the individual outputs. So that way, if you need to separate kind of if you wanted to process the top and bottom mics of your snares separately, you can. So even though they're being triggered by the same MIDI note. All right, hang on 1 second. My monitoring computer just powered off accidentally. So let me know if that's helpful for you or if you need more control with that. Get my let me get my monitoring computer back on. Make sure that we're still didn't get shut off. Sorry about that. Okay, give me just a second, get my computer booted back up. Make sure the audio is still, I think we're live stream still going on. I'll just monitor here on my phone. Okay. Okay, almost there. All right. Sorry about that. My plug on my little laptop where I see all of the screens on came unplugged. All right. Okay, so we see, here, bear with me just a second. Okay. All right, so I just see, is there a way to, all right. Okay, so we see, next question. Hi, sir, can I set up a surround monitor with 4 monitors in Cubase using Antelope Discrete 4? Can you show me how to set it up? Okay, let me see if I get it back on my monitoring computer. I think I'm close. Sorry, I had to reboot. Okay, so if you want to set up a surround monitor, what you would do is just come over to your audio connections. You would go to your outputs. So here we could just say, let me just remove these buses. All right, so what you want to do is to add a bus. We say we want this to be, and probably if you are working with quadraphonic, you could just say, okay, we want to do quadraphonics. So it'll be left, right, and left surround, right surround. So now we have a quadraphonic bus of 4 channels. So generally surround, a lot of people do 5-1, but if you have just 4 outputs. So let's go ahead and add an audio track. And now we want this track, We could say, okay, it's going to be a mono source track, and we want this to go into our quadraphonic output. So now I go to the channel and let's see if we're just take these out of the folder. All right, so we say this track is now going to our quadraphonic output. So when we go to the panner, now we could pan between your left, right, left surround, right surround. If you have a 5.1, that would add a center channel as well as an LFE channel that you could send signals to your subwoofer. But so go into your actual audio connections. On the outputs, create a quadraphonic. So you want to add bus, choose for that to be quadraphonic. Take that particular source. We want to route the channel, and as you create channel, you could route it to the quadraphonic out. And then you could, as you open up the panner for that particular channel, as you open up the channel editor, now you could come over and have your panning set for quadraphonic right there. So for your 4 channels. All right, so we see, okay, please, is it possible to explain the way to see masking problems in supervision and new update? Maybe the friends here also don't know about it. Let me know kind of like what masking problems, that you want to see. So let's say if we were looking, I'll just jump back. Okay, so I guess, generally with, let me just try with, so often if you have frequencies that are kind of canceling each other out, so let's say let's see if we could do it from this one, might be a good. Okay, so let's say if we have our kick and snare going on, and this track is audio. All right, and let's look at maybe our overheads here. All right, now let's go look at and let's say we go to supervision here, and may have a preset I made for phase. All right, so sometimes you may have, as you look at audio waveforms, you may notice that, let's say if we duplicated a track here, like let's say if we had our drums, like we had multiple microphones on our drums, and if the microphone, we could think of sound as like a wave that goes through the air. And when we look at the digital audio waveform, we often, this is, we go into positive or negative values in the waveform, in the cycle. we could see this represented in a waveform. Now, sometimes you may have a microphone that's slightly placed differently. So let's say, and you may have what's called like a phasing issue. So let's say if we're playing this, so sometimes if you have tracks, so let's say I'm just listening to my snare or my kick drums here. So you may, as you're doing this, like you may notice that, you know, if you're not hearing stuff, that something could be out of phase. So if I ever so slightly shift the start position of this event here, let's just shift it a little earlier. So then you could start to see, like, you know, phasing issues with that, and you could see it in the waveform. I'll show you like on an acoustic guitar. It'll be a good way to see it. See if I still have that project in my. All right. This would be a good example here. Okay, so let's say we have this guitar, and I'm going to split this into two mono files. So I'll come over here and okay, so as we do this, so let's say if I flip the phase on one of the guitar channels here. So we have a couple of different phase scopes. So when we come over here, we can see kind of a typical phase scope. We have also panorama. This one is really useful. This phase scope here called a multi-correlation, because this could show you what frequencies are actually out of phase. So often when you see the phase go kind of horizontal, that's not a good sign. So you could just kind of isolate tracks that you think could be masking. So, and often, again, it's because when we are looking at channels, when the channel, like if we invert the polarity here, we can see that one channel is going up in the waveform, the other channel is going down. And then that's causing the waveform to kind of mask out. So other instruments could be masking out, and you could see and hear the changes here. So again, adjust the phase inversion there. So check out like the multi-correlation, the panorama, and the phase scope, and that'll give you a good indication when you kind of solo tracks of how those tracks are relating to each other's with their phase relationships, so that, you know, the full frequencies will be present, not canceling. You may see this also when you have like a microphone on a bass amp that's blended with a DI bass signal. Because the signal from the DI may be much faster than going into the amp, and the microphone picking up the sound a couple milliseconds later from the amplifier. And when you combine them, sometimes they may sound weak. So always just try to come over here, and if you fear that something is out of phase, you could just come right over here and toggle the phase and just invert the phase, and that will fix it most of the time. All right. All right, we see a question, what is the fundamental differences between Groove Agent and the SE version? So the SE version comes with, directly with Cubase. The full version, some of the things that it's going to give you is you could have multiple agents. So where we see like how Soren was just talking about, oh, maybe I need to beef it up. So here we could have one agent that's going to be like an acoustic agent. We could go to another agent that would basically function as, so you could have multiple, one that could be electronic, one that could be a marching band, that could be percussion. So with the full Groove Agent, you could have multiple agents at once. There's also a performance utility mode. So if we come over here, we could choose to activate. So if you wanted to do like note repeat functionality, you could hit these particular keys, and we could map these keys to other controls, so that if you want to do like 30-second note hi-hats, you could just simply turn that on directly here and have different note repeat patterns. Groove Agent full version, you also have a sidechain input, so you could sample and make your own drum kits directly inside of Groove Agent. So you could sidechain, so if you have 6 kick drums that are layered and you wanted to sidechain all those and record it directly into. So when we come over to, your options, when you go to edit, you'll see a record mode. So you could do sampling directly inside of Groove Agent. So you can start your key and just kind of hit the keys and do all of your internal drum sampling right there. Also, you will have more patterns. Coming with the full Groove Agent, there are more kits that come with it. More patterns, and so those are the main differences between. So multiple agents running simultaneously, recording, note repeat functionality. There's also where you could break apart the sound of a sample into like its tonal part, its percussive part, so you could do kind of sound design and more content and patterns that come with it. All right. Let's see. Soren just says, thanks for your context. The whole song, the drums are weak and need to be beefed up. He says, thank you for this info. It'll be tried. All right. So we have DJ King LZ says from Central Florida. So I spent a lot of time in Orlando, if that's where you're at. Always love going to Tampa. One of my college roommates lives in Tampa. He's in St. Petersburg now, but I always love going there, catching up with him, visiting him and his family. All right, so we see Nick joining from Essex in the UK. He says, just popped by to press like. Hope you're all doing well. Hope to catch up soon. Hope you're doing well, Nick. Thanks for popping in. All right, see, Michael Teams is granted me 1 gallon of Bavarian cream ice cream. Sounds very German, so I like it. And Nick has gotten 1 gallon of banana nut ice cream. All right, so we see question, is there a way to control the virtual drummer in Groove Agent with MIDI controls? All right, so let's jump back over. So let's say we have Groove Agent here. All right, so let's come over. Okay. All right, so let's say I just want to come over here. So one of the cool things that you can do in Groove Agent is, you could have different levels of complexity. So we could start something off kind of very tame. But let's say I want to kind of just right click. We could say learn CC. And now as I move like my modulation wheel, we could just control that parameter. So let's say if I come here, I want to assign the dynamics, I could learn CC. So between this fader and my mod wheel, so most of the functions, you could just kind of come over here and say learn CC. Now you can say every 8 measures do a fill. Let's adjust our dynamics with the MIDI message. And let's adjust the complexity here. So you can do the thing that all drummers hate where you have super intensity but low dynamics. Or the opposite. So just about any of the parameters that you want. So let's say, okay, I want to add more swing. Let's learn a CC. I will come over here. And let's say, okay, I want this to be like 8th note swing. So one fader here, just controlling dynamics. So just about any parameter, you could just kind of right click in Groove Agent and learn the MIDI CC. You could also just come over, right click and assign it to a quick control or to a new automation lane. So, but just, you know, come right over here, learn CC, and then you're controlling all the parameters via MIDI. So let me know if that's what you're thinking of, Tim. All right, so we see Daniel Pashman. Hey, Greg, is there a way to have newly created tracks be set to no input every time? Tracks that have samples or printed audio don't necessarily need input monitoring. Thanks. So as we go to add tracks, so let's say, okay, I want to add audio tracks. I'm going to choose let's see if we could choose no input. I think we could do it with instrument tracks. Let me try with instruments. All right, so say here we can say not connected. And we add the track and there's not connected. So let's see if we could do the same. We'll try with audio again. I don't think that, it doesn't seem like there's a way to have it not connected. If it's for fear of like maybe turning on. So let's say we just want to, let's go to our studio connections here. Or to our audio connections, sorry. And let's just add an input. And I'll just say mono input and have that to be not connected. And let's say, okay, I want my. So now when I go to add, and we could name this as, instead of mono in, we could just say no in. So now as we go to add an audio track, we could just choose our actual input to be no input. And now, let's see if we can. So, and then there's no input that's assigned to it. So, but it seems like it's going to want to do that, but you could assign it to an input that's not assigned to anything. I think, well, let me know if that works for you. All right, wonderful to see Gareth on from Bilbao, Spain. He might be traveling from the Ross Ice Shelf. All right. Thanks for joining us from Antarctica. Okay, so we see from John Lunnan, subject Cubase 14 live looping via MIDI remote using a virus TI2 via UR22 MIDI. As a controller in Cubase 14, I've mapped mutes, but how do I map keys to trigger loop arranger tracks? Okay, so let's say I move this out of my way of my controller. All right, so let's say I have arranger tracks. Let's see if I have this project open still. Okay. Try a different project. All right, so let's go ahead and make like some arranger tracks here. Okay, so we could do it a couple ways. One could be a MIDI remote, but if you just wanted to assign like your keys, we can come over. So let's remove this divide track list. All right, so we have, let's say, number of tracks here. Let's add an arranger track. Okay, so let's come here. So let's say, okay, we want these parts of our arranger track. And we could label these option, double clicking. Etc. Okay, so let's assign these to MIDI notes. So if we want to do it from like a MIDI keyboard, probably an easy way is if you go to studio setup, let's come over, click on the plus sign. We want to add a generic remote device. Let's see if I have one already in here. All right, so now what I want to do is define, this is going into your UR22C input. So let's say it's going in and out of your UR24C, and we're going to dedicate particular keys. So what I want to do is, and we can see this particular MIDI note message here will trigger this function. All right, so I'm going to learn, so I'm going to hit, and as I do this, so I'm going to set up for my correct MIDI interface so that this will work. So as I do this, you'll see that the MIDI note address here is changing what the MIDI note message is. So now what I can do is we're going to take this and we're going to say, go to command, and then you'll see under arranger, and then we can say trigger arranger event 1. So let's go to fader 2. I want this MIDI note, and we'll change this to Arranger Event 2. Let's come here. I'll learn that MIDI note, and we want to do Command Arranger, trigger Arranger Event 3. And we'll do one more. So Command Arranger, trigger Arranger 4. Okay. So now we'll hit apply. Okay. So as I'm playing, I can just start playing that. Let's hit another MIDI message. And then we could just trigger our different functions to jump. And we could have this jump mode, we'll say, instead of going all the way to the end, we could just now just trigger the MIDI notes and trigger our different arrangements directly here. We could also do this in a MIDI remote. So if you wanted to set up like particular keys on your keyboard, or if you just have like drum pads on a controller, if you have a MIDI remote device, we could also come over here and just say, I want this particular key. And again, we would go to our key commands to Arranger, and then we could trigger up to 20 different Arranger 20 different Arranger events right there. So same principle, but we could assign those to, if you have a MIDI remote, if you're just doing a quick keyboard and you want that the top octave to switch, go to your studio setup to generic remote, set the MIDI mapping. You could just do a learn on a particular functions, and then devices command. You want to go to the arranger to trigger the arranger event right there, and then hit apply, and then you could just immediately jump to different arranger events on the fly from a MIDI message. So let me know if that's helpful for you. Sorry, my chat field just jumped on me. All right, so we see from Fox Andrews says, thanks, Greg. That's perfect. Really appreciate the help. Let me just see if I can remember what we were talking about earlier. Scroll back. Okay, for the mics on Groove Agent, so glad it's helpful. All right, so we see from Jeffrey Gerber, is there a Discord server / community? So yeah, Jazz Dude runs it, and he just shared the link for that. Check it out. All right, Michael Teams is granted Gareth 1 gallon of papaya pecan ice cream. Such good flavors. All right, so we see from Gareth that Michael Teams is plugged back in after a storm. So we see a question from Jay the Jolly. Curious, as my Chord Nano Control 2 is arriving soon, is there anything specific needed to set it up? If all I want is very basic Nano sliders, controls, Cubase mixer sliders, and mutes, cellos, and so on. No, it's pretty much it. You'll see different. So you have a focus quick control set. You'll have a mixer preset. So there's all sorts of different presets that are already for different mapping pages. So once you connect it, your MIDI, your Nano control should show up right at the bottom there. All right, so we see from Jay the Jolly says, so heard you can transpose it from control mixer 1 through 8. It goes 9 through 16. Seems neat for a compact way to physically feel what you're doing. So yeah, that's one of the great things with the MIDI remote. So the Mackie control specification expected you to always, navigate your tracks, and probably in 2000 or 1999 when it was released, people weren't thinking of doing, thousands of tracks on your computer at the time. But it doesn't follow the track selection as part of the Mackie control specification. So let's say if I have like 40 tracks here and I want to quickly navigate. So one of the things that you'll see is, let's say if I come over here and we go to the mixer column, we see this little white fader that we see here. So I'll just hide this momentarily. So where we see these 8 lines, that indicates which 8 faders are being controlled by the, let me just make these all a little taller. And I'll just come over here to my volume and pan, add those. Okay, so now we see this little white outlines indicating which channels are being controlled by your control surface. So now if I select channel 10, we can see that it is the next bank of 8 controllers that's being controlled by the channel. So if we go to our mix console here, we could just see that, those particular channels will be controlled. So that way you could, and there's a bank button on the particular, on the CC121, so that you could, just bank over to next tracks or previous tracks. So, but if you come over here and say, now I select channel 5, it will automatically select those channels to be banked. So check that out. But yeah, I love my little nano control for how much space it takes and the functionality it offers. I think it's really great, and it's inexpensive too. It's a great value in control surfaces. And with the MIDI remote setup, you could have multiple control surfaces all working simultaneously. All right, wonderful to see Randy Lee Music on. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for joining us today from Texas. All right, John Koskikin's asking a question. Hi, Greg. Not an official Cubase question, but here goes. My UAD interface has a recall session feature that doesn't appear in the tools or other after moving from Cubase 12 to 14. UAD drive from C12 to 14 UAD driver update. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't have the UAD. I don't have a UAD interface, so I haven't really worked with that. The recall session feature doesn't appear in the tools, so I don't think that it would appear like within Cubase. We have tools that will be working internally for like Yamaha hardware that has kind of the advanced integration. But let me know if I'm misunderstanding, but I don't have a UAD interface. All right, Randy Lee Music's received 1 gallon of German chocolate cake ice cream. All right, Peter Raymond says, hi, the last live stream showed me how to record audio from a MIDI track to avoid a render in place error. Can you confirm routing audio from a MIDI track to an audio track is a pro version only? It might be pro. I'll open up 14 artist. Let me see if it's in artist. I don't think it changed in 15, but I'll open up Cubase 14 Artist and we'll see. Okay, so we're in Cubase Artist. Let's come over here. All right, so let's add an audio track, and yeah, it looks like that might be a pro only feature. All right, but again, let's just come over here. I'll record. All right, but if I wanted to just render that, we just come again to and turn that into audio. I know I think you're having maybe problems, but it looks like it is only perhaps a Cubase Pro feature. All right, Tim Weinheimer says, yes, Greg, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you. Did Simon Phillips actually play on those patterns in the Simon Phillips kit? So yeah, Simon Phillips actually played those particular patterns. He kind of lost his license accidentally, so I was able a couple months ago to get him new licenses for him for his own kits, so he could do his I think it was his new jazz album he was working on. He was using the Simon Phillips drums in Groove Agent. So, but yeah, it is Simon that actually played all those. So not only do you get his 3 of his drum kits and the 3 different Simon Phillips Groove Agent kits, but you get him playing the patterns as well. And just a really wonderful man. Just always enjoy catching up with Simon when I talk to him. All right, so we see Jeffrey Gerber. Does anyone know if OmniVocal will be made for Windows ARM? Is it in the works? Let me just take a quick look. I'll just confirm. Let me boot up I have an ARM laptop here. Let me see if there's any. All right, I'm going to let my Windows ARM laptop, it's firing up now. You have to give it a minute to boot up. Let me see if I get OmniVocal is working on here or not. I haven't heard whether if it's working or not working on ARM, but let me just check. All right, so I'm just booting up. Trying to sell me Microsoft OneDrive. All right, so I'm just going to look into Download Assistant here quickly. Sorry, my laptop just turned off. Try again. Sorry about that, it's rebooting. Yeah, I think the VST Connect may not work on Windows ARM, but I don't remember OmniVocal, but that could be. All right, just logging into. All right. So it looks like it's up and running here on my ARM machine. So let me just put a note in, make sure it's. All right, I'm just going to enter. Yep. So it's working on it's working on my ARM notebook here. So looks like it's kind of functioning as expected. So let me know if you have problems, but it seems like it's working. So at least it's working as a plugin inside of Cubase. So. All right, so we see from DJ King LZ just says, thanks, Greg. I have Absolute 2, and I really miss using the Groove Agent I had there. I've been out of the game for so long, just catching up, waiting for discounts to upgrade, seeing I've missed updates. Yeah, so there's a lot of great new things. All right, Robert Greenleaf, 12K, asks, how do you use Native Instruments Reactor inside of Cubase to make loops and samples? So I'm pretty sure it would just show up. I haven't run Reactor in a long time, but if we come over here, we could just say, let's add an instrument, and then you would just open up Reactor under whatever, wherever it's installed, and then you should be able to just run it as a VST instrument inside. This is obviously Holly, and I don't have a Reactor license, but now you could just simply run that directly inside as a VST plugin, I would think. See, John Costigan is also recommending to Soren about to get more stomp in your drums. You could try the envelope shaper. So. sorry, my chat field jumped. Okay. Okay, so we see from John Lunnan, just says, awesome, thank you, Greg. And Gareth is remembering, wants to remind everyone to quantize the like button by hitting it. He says, he shared a secret that every time someone presses it, I get a little tickle, so. All right, Chris Higginson asks, hi Greg, I have a friend who is considering getting Cubase Elements. Would we be able to collaborate on projects remotely? Although I'm running Cubase Pro, would I have to run Cubase Elements? So if you're going to be running like very specific like plugins that are only in Pro, then if you pass it on, he may not be able to open up like those elements of the project. I think the project would open up. If you do have a Cubase Pro license, you could check how it's going to be for him. Like when you start the program, just hold down the Alt or Option key. Like when starting, I'll show this in Cubase 14 again. So your Cubase 15 or Cubase 14, I think 13 Pro added, where you could just come over here. And all of the Cubase versions are kind of unified so that when we hold down the Alt or Option key after starting the program, that we can get let's see if I still have it open. Yeah, sorry. All right, so I'm going to quit Cubase 14 Artist. Again, just to check if you're going to have problems, just come over here, say, okay, I want to. So hold down the Alt or Option key when you start the program, and then you can say, okay, I'm going to open up my Cubase Elements 15. And you could open up the project and see kind of the same experience that your friend running Cubase Elements would have. But generally the projects would open up, but if there's specific features that are going to be in 15, like, Very Audio, which is in Cubase Artist, and Cubase Pro, then that may not carry over for you in 15, but it may play back the audio, but not the different edits made in a function that's not in the lighter version. All right, wonderful to see Graham Witcher on. And he's wishing that Gareth is writing some great new music. Okay, so we see from Jay the Jolly says, nice to have that visual to see what is controlled by the Nano indeed. So it's mostly just plug and play with Cubase for the Nano Control 2 then. It's very nice if I understand correctly. Yeah, so the Nano Control 2, you just basically plug it right in. When you start Cubase, it'll just be sitting in there at the bottom with presets and ready to go for you. All right, so we see from Wismo74. Hi, Greg. My question is, why randomly in chord pads when I press pad is higher voicing and other lower, and this happens randomly on pads? I don't know if I trigger something. I'm not sure. So in earlier versions when dealing with chord pads, there was different zones that you could hit. I think that this was maybe 12 and earlier or 11 and earlier. But all All right, so let's say if we have, like, let's say a quick Rhodes part here, and we go to our chord pads, you know, we can just... Okay, so so if we come over here, one of the things that you could do is, you know, so in earlier versions on the chord pads, you could do different tensions by hitting kind of an arrow here or an up arrow to do different chord voicings. So this will kind of do different voicings, and this could do different tensions. So we say we want to go from D minor to D minor ninth to 6 to 6 9 7. So we could do that. Now also when we're doing these, we can have keys on our keyboard. So if you get to this MIDI setup, and I think it's maybe 13 when it's changed, but you could have chord modifiers. So you could see if you turn that off, but once you have the chord modifiers active, we could have different notes that will control. So like if you played a different MIDI note, these MIDI notes could control the chord voicings for you. So we could just say, okay, as we come over here, and we could have different sections. So we could have MIDI control over these. So if I come here and let's say I hit this key, I could transpose. Or do different chord voicings depending on. So there are different MIDI trigger notes. So, and again, if you come over here, you could see if you just do the chord modifiers and turn those off and hit OK, that those keys will disappear. And if you have, you know, let's say if you have more than one octave of chords or an octave and a half here, like if you have 64 different chords, some of those chords may be overlapping with the trigger notes. So it could be where you're playing a chord, but it's also transposing at the same time, depending on your settings. So if you don't want it to transpose, click here and try to uncheck the chord modifiers and see if that makes a difference for you. All right, so we see, great to see Randy Lee Music's doing well. Doing great. Looking forward to have an orchestra concert this weekend. Looking forward to that. All right, so Gareth is anxiously waiting to hear Graham Witcher's 105th Symphony, or Graham Witcher's Symphony number 23 in A-flat major, A-flat minor. Fun key. All right, so we see from Peter Raymond says, thanks for your help. These live streams are such a great resource. Yeah, thank you. Hope it's helpful. All right, so we've learned that Graham Witcher, one of his favorite chords is a G minor ninth. That'll be a future trivia question. So. All right, so we see some clarification from John Koskian. It says the UAD Apollo session sync should appear in the VSTI list under tools or other that runs from a post fader insert into master out of the Cubase mixer. It lives in the Apollo applet. So is it a VST instrument or a VST effect? So it sounds like, and you say the VSTi list under tools, but make sure that, because if we go to, and you could look at your, if you go to the VST plugin manager, see if you see it listed in here. So if you see under tools, so you're saying that probably should show up there. So make sure, one, that you don't have, see if you go, I'm not sure if you have a custom VST plugin collection. So if a plugin was added and you switched your plugin collection and didn't migrate that plugin over, at that point it could not show up. But if you go to default, that should show all of your plugins. And make sure that, that's something like that's controlling the hardware that may show up, maybe not under VST instruments. I know you said VSTi, but just to make sure that you're doing as it will probably show up as a VST effect. So if you don't see the tools here, and you could also check to see if it's in a block list as well. But see if you switch to default, if you see it. Now, another way of, if it's not in a particular plugin collection, so say we're in your VST effects, if we go to this little drop down menu, we could say hide plugins that are in the active collection. So this could show all the plugins that are not in a collection. So, excuse me, I had to sneeze. So then you could see which plugins that are installed that Cubase is recognizing, but it's not in the system there. So, but maybe if someone else has UAD hardware and it's popular, if there's something that could help John out with that, that would be helpful. But you can see all plugins, and you could search for the particular plugin in the VST plugin manager to see if you have it there. All right, so we see DJ FK SHG, just wishing everyone a nice weekend. Thanks for joining us today. All right, Randy Lee Music says, question, you went over some Mackie protocol info. I have a Tascam US 2400. I just loaded it back up. So should I use the Mackie protocol for that? Thanks. So the Mackie protocol will work. So basically what you would do is run it as 3 Mackie controls. So when you come over, if you want to, you can set it up to work in the MIDI remote. And there's advantages for setting up with the MIDI remote. But if you wanted to spend 2 minutes to get it working, come over to your studio setup, and you'd want to, so studio menu to studio setup. And what you need to do is just to come over here and add 3 Mackie controls. And basically it's going to be I think fader, and it would probably be listed as the USB driver for, bank. It may say bank 1, 2, and 3, or port 1, 2, and 3. And you would just do those in order. So you have 3 Mackie controls, and then that would allow you to use your US 2400 inside of Cubase. So it's basically 24 faders, and it's basically going to be 3 banks of 8 faders, or it's 3 Mackie controls built into one single device. All right, so we see. All right, so we see from Wismo 74, now Native Instruments is bought by InMusic, so we'll see where it's going. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. All right. So Adam Langford asks, I have a Chord Nano Control 2 coming. Is it simple to get the faders to control MIDI CC1 and CC11 for orchestral music, for example, Cubase Pro 15? So when you connect it first, it may automatically show up as a MIDI remote device. And what the MIDI remote device is allowing you to do is to move the faders here. And this is using MIDI messages to now control different parameters in the program. So if you want it for it to just put out CC1 and CC11 and not control these particular parameters, what you could do is when we go to the setup, you could just temporarily disable this. So let's say, okay, I want to come over here. Let's go. I think if we go to Nano Control 2 here, we could just say, okay, I want to remove the control surface, and now it's going to function as a MIDI controller. So when we disable it from the control surface, what we could do now, and I think that, let's see if I have the little utility program. Let's see. But there's a little utility that you could use just to and what that utility will allow you to do is to now use, to define what MIDI CC message is. So if you wanted to use it just for MIDI CC messages, you may have to come over to the Nano Control and turn off the MIDI remote. But when you come over here, we could just, activate the MIDI remote again here. So let's say if we go to your scripts and let's say our Nano Control. So you could disable the controller script here and then just re-enable. So you could just choose to enable and re-enable the script just like that. So otherwise, instead of it just, because it's always going to be spitting out MIDI messages, but we can think of the MIDI messages as the language that's going to control different parameters inside of Cubase. So instead of, if you wanted to just do CC1 and CC11, just assign that in the Chord software. There's a little utility, and you could assign what it's doing right there. You could also choose to have 6 faders that are doing something, and the other faders that are just spitting out CC11, CC1 if you wanted to. So basically you could not define all of the faders in the device if you always wanted to have CC1, CC11, and then you could have 6 faders for other controls if needed to. You see John Koskian says he's going to look further in the plugin manager for the control plugin for the universal audio. All right, let's jump over to another question that was mailed in. All right, so we have a question that says, I'm using 15 Pro. I want to set the grid to 12/8. It says 1.2.3.4. The click pattern is correct. Can you please help? Okay, so let me jump back to project here. Okay, so let's say we have all right, so what we've done is we have a signature track, and we have the time signature of 12/8. Now I have, when we double click on our signature track, you may notice that it may just kind of show up kind of like this. Often when we're doing in 12/8, we may want to have like basically triplets on, you know, like a triplet feel, like 1 2 3 2 2 3 3 2 3 4 2 3. So I'm going to come over here and say every third note we want for that to be up. Okay, so we have this pattern. Now let's say when we look at our grid, we could see our grid line kind of based upon this pattern. So we see that we have kind of 4 4. But let's say I wanted to do like 2 groups of 3 and then 1 group of 6. All right. So we come here and we say, okay, let's just adjust accordingly. All right. Now what we could do is right click in this area and we can say use metronome click pattern lines level for grid line emphasis. So with that turned off, we just see 12/8 here divisions, but we don't necessarily see the reflection of this click pattern. So again, we see that we have like 2 groups of 3, 1 group of 6, but when we look at this, we just kind of have 12/8 for our grid. So if I right click on the ruler and say use metronome click pattern level for grid line emphasis, we can see that this grid will automatically change. Now as we would double click on an event, so let's say if we have MIDI event here, we could have this kind of automatically, so let's say we want this to be set to 8th notes, so as we move we can have our event snap to the grid, but we could see that the grid emphasis, since we're here, we say okay, we're doing 2 groups of 3, 1 group of 6, so we go to the next measure and we see 2 groups of 3, 1 group of 6. Now we could also do this and see this directly inside of our score editor as well. So let's say if we make this part longer, and again by right clicking we say use the metronome click pattern level for grid line emphasis, so we see kind of equal divisions. But again, if I wanted that to follow the actual signature pattern that we have, and again I just come right over here where we see 2 groups of 3, 1 group of 6, again right click and say use metronome click pattern, so then we could see the grid lines emphasized. Now if you wanted the grid lines to be more obvious, we could also go into your settings on Mac OS or under the edit menu on Windows to your preferences, and we go to let's say general colors. So let's say if we want to go to our editor colors and we want more grid lines, so we could just come over and choose our accent colors, and here we could adjust kind of our grid line. So as soon as we come here, we can say, okay, I want the grid lines to be super bright and stand out more and be more obvious. So now we could have that grid line kind of emphasized. So, and as we move notes, we could see the pattern. So if I change the pattern here, so let's say I want it to be 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2. As I make my change here, we can see that this will automatically reflect in our grid changes right here. So let's say, let's come there, And now we could have those different pulses. So if you're doing kind of polyrhythmic or kind of non-standard emphasis divisions for the project window. So once we have this set up, go to the ruler for the track and right click and use the metronome click pattern level for the grid line emphasis on the project editor and on the main project window. And again, once we go to your preferences or settings, you could just come over here and use the custom colors. And for the background and grid line emphasis, you could come over here and change those grid lines so that they are more distinct overall and easier to differentiate. So, or you could leave it at the default value, like so. All right, let's see if we got live questions coming in. Okay. All right, so we see Lawrence from Barn Door Recording. Thanks for joining us. All right, so Michael Teams has a question. How to install an external effect in Cubase? I have a Behringer 9024 finalizer I would like to use in Cubase. Thanks for your help. Greg, more ice cream for you. Sounds good. All right. All right, so let's say, all right, so what we want to do is to make sure we have an audio interface that has enough inputs and outputs that we want to use for it. Now, sometimes like a finalizer, some people would treat that as kind of like a, final like processor on the master bus. So what we'd want to do is go to your studio menu and we will go to audio connections. And once we go to our audio connections here, we would go to external effects. So what we want to do is basically connect the outputs from your audio interface to the inputs of the Behringer processor, the outputs of the Behringer processor to the inputs of your audio interface. So in this case, it would probably be stereo. So let's say, okay, I want to come over here. We're going to click on Add External Effect. We're going to say Finalizer. All right, and it's probably going to be a stereo configuration. So we're going to have a stereo in, stereo out, and then we will hit OK. Now, once we have our finalizer set up, we need to define the input and output ports of where it's connected to. So let's say you're going in and out of 5 and 6. So you'd say out 5 to input, out left, out 6 into input right, and then output left to input 5 of your audio interface, output left of the finalizer to input 5 of the interface, output right to input 6 of the audio interface. So now as we do this round trip, this could actually cause more latency on the signal. So what we want to do is as we go to an audio track, we're going to go to the inserts. So if we're doing this on our master fader, I could just come over here and say, okay, we're going to go to our stereo out, and let's go ahead and load up an insert effect. So here we're going to go to external plugins. We'll see, okay, we'll select our finalizer. So now when we play signal through it, it's going to send it out to the finalizer from the audio interface to the input of the finalizer, get processed in the finalizer. It goes through its own A to D, D to A stage. It goes through the processing. It could be adding latency. The output of the finalizer is being brought back in. Now, to make sure that the timing of all this is correct, because if you change the buffer size, that will change the timing. You'll see this little thing that says measure delay. What you want to do is just click on that, and that will ping the system. So it sends a little signal down that path, will calculate the delay, and automatically shift that track so that it plays back earlier to compensate for the delay that's imposed by the routing scenario. So again, go to your studio menu to audio connections, click on external effects, add an external effect, define the inputs and outputs. When you go to a track, it'll then show up under external plugins. Once you open that up, there's no real editor per se, but you can come right over here and just choose to measure the delay. And now we could have the finalizer going in and out of the master, channel. Now when you export, because the process has to go through the finalizer in real time, it's going to switch to a real-time export and capture that. So if you wanted the sound of the finalizer kind of embedded or burned into your particular project, when you export, it's going to do it in real time because the audio has to get processed, through the hardware unit and then recaptured back through the hardware unit so that the hardware can be employed and used directly inside of Cubase. Just let me know if that's helpful for you, Michael. All right, wonderful to see Michael Marshall checking in from Somerset, UK. Glad you could join us today. Okay, Skippy Webb asks, is it possible to fine-tune the pitch of a single MIDI note, thus not semitones? I found note expression Pitchbend, but is there an easier way? Thanks. So if there's a couple of approaches. So not all instruments will support this. So there's a good chance, some a lot of external MIDI instruments won't do it. So let's say if I'm here on, if you know exactly what pitch that you want it to be, and I'm not sure if you want it to always be like this particular note, to always be a little sharp or a little flat, like if you're doing like different musical temperaments or different tunings. But if you wanted to, you could go to your MIDI inserts, and there's a MIDI plugin called Microtuner, and you could try this with Halion, Sonic, Halion, Groove, or with Retrologue, Pad Shop. And now what you could do is you could actually just come over here and then say, okay, I want my C. So let's say we're in the key of C major, and you can say every one of my C sharps I want to be 9 cents sharp, and I want all of my D sharps to be 8 cents flat. So while the MIDI plays back, it will actually go through here, and you could detune each of the instruments. So you can kind of set the tonal center here. So you can say, okay, my tonal center is. And this is also really good for if you wanted to come up and say there's different factory presets. So if I want to be pure major tuning, but I want it to be in a key of E, we can just simply adjust all of the different root notes here so that all of the notes that are in the key of E will have the correct pitch deviation, so that it's going to be purely tuned to that particular key. So you could give that a try there. So if you're doing it globally, if you need to do it individually, so not all instruments will support note expression. So, but if you have, like particular notes that, if it's just one note in MIDI that you want, you could come over here, because MIDI itself in MIDI 1.0 realm, MIDI 2.0 has finally addressed this after Steinberg kind of invented the concept here of where we could double click on a particular note and go into the expression editor, and we could say, okay, I just want to go to tuning, and here we could see, okay, do you want it to be up 2.06, cent, so we could just adjust kind of the tuning scale right here of how out of tune one particular note is as well. But if you want it to be for all notes, like all E's or all D flats to be, pitched up, I would try the Microtuner MIDI plugin, because that could do it globally for you as well. So let me know if you want it for just one note. If it was one note, I may do note expression if your instrument supported it. Otherwise, if you wanted like consistent results for this pitch on multiple notes, I would do the micro tuner plugin. All right, so we see Michael Teams says, thanks, Greg, a project for this evening. And Michael Teams wants everyone to whack the like button. Okay. All right, let's go to another question that was mailed in. All right, how to add a Mackie control device to Cubase Elements 14. Okay, so let me go ahead and open up Cubase Elements. Again, you could open up lighter versions of your Cubase if you want to run. If you have Cubase Pro license, hold down the Alt or Option key, and let's open up 14. So we will come over here. Let's open up Cubase Elements. Okay, so if I wanted to configure Mackie control, we could come over here. So let's go to your studio menu, to studio setup. You're going to click on the plus sign, and let's add a Mackie control. And now that you have a Mackie control added, you could add multiple Mackie controls if you want. We could select your Mackie control, come over here, set the MIDI input and output port where that device is connected to. And then your Mackie control will have the communication so you could go right back to where you were. So that will automatically configure the Mackie control. That's all you have to do. So again, come over to studio menu, to studio setup, click on the plus sign, then you could add or erase different control surfaces right there. Make sure that you have the right MIDI input and output port set, and then you'll be all good to go. All right, let's go back so we had more live questions. All right, Alex B asks, hello, Greg. Hope you're doing well. Doing great, thanks. Will Microtuner work with third-party VSTs? So yes, definitely. So not all VSTs will support kind of the, it's often referred to, you know, like note expression or MPE, like MIDI polyphonic editing. So a lot of, you know, all VST3 has it, so it works with third-party VSTs. There could still be a number of VST developers that don't support it, and you could, you know, let them know that you want the support. The support has been in Cubase probably for, I think, since version 6, so it's probably been more than a dozen years. Okay, let's go to another question. It's mailed in. I saw this one online. Okay, so we see how to bounce or consolidate all MIDI events on a project so that they're contiguous. Okay. Okay, so let's say we have these MIDI events, and a lot of times if we have an audio event, so let me just come over here. And if we wanted to turn these 4 audio events into one event, we could come over here and just go to your audio menu to bounce selection. So now at that point, it's created a new audio file. We could have it automatically replaced. the existing file. So we could do that very easily. All right, so but the same question is, how do we do that for MIDI? So a lot of times if we come over here, there's a bounce MIDI function. So if we come over here, we can say bounce MIDI, and we can do that, but we can't necessarily do that for if we have multiple tracks. So let's give it a shot just to make sure. So I'm going to select all those events, all the tracks. I think that this may do just the top one, or the bounce MIDI doesn't show up. Let's see if we just select all of our events and we go to MIDI. So the bounce MIDI, let's select just like no tracks and the events only, and see the bounce MIDI. All right, so what you could do if you wanted to kind of bounce just like we did going from 4 separate events to one single event, if we wanted to do this in the MIDI realm, just come over here, select all of your MIDI events, right click, and just choose under the edit menu glue. And now we can see that we have our multiple MIDI events will all be one contiguous event, like so. So again, if you want to pass this on to someone and you want to kind of almost do a bounce selection for multiple MIDI tracks, if you have like 30 MIDI tracks at once, again, come here to edit, to glue. And that will make it all one contiguous event, and we don't have to use like the glue tool to come over here on each one. So you don't have to hold down the glue tool and say, okay, let's hold down Alt and do each track one at a time. We could just select all the events here, edit, glue. All right, let's see if we have another live question. All right, so we see from Alex B 5174 says, thanks a lot, Greg. We see Jazz Dude sharing a link to the vocoder tutorial video, and there's a series of video tutorials on the built-in plugins. Cubase are quite good to watch. All right, let's get to the next question that was mailed in. Okay, so we have a question here. All right. It says, hi, I'm struggling a bit with modulation, Retrologue, and Cubase Artist 12. Say I'm routing an LFO to modulate pitch. That is source LFO 1 to destination pitch. This depth control then seems extremely sensitive, making it hard for me to apply slight vibrato. Is there any workaround? So if I don't want to route the LFO through another control. All right, so let's take a look. All right, so let's open up. So let's say if I come here, we want to set, let's create a source. I'll just revert this project. All right, so let's say we have a basic synth patch here. All right, so what we want to do is so we want to modulate, let's say the pitch, so we'll say LFO, and let's adjust our destination, we'll set to pitch. All right, now we could have different waveforms. Now we could have this synchronized to tempo if we wanted to. So let's say we have our sync. So we could adjust the frequency of that pitch change. Now this is also kind of, and we could choose to have this sync to tempo if we wanted to. So if we say, okay, I want this to every half note, or let's say every eighth note, every 16th note. Now when we adjust kind of the depth of the modulation, we could come over here. So you can kind of go to fairly extreme amounts pretty quickly. So what you might want to do is, like, let's say as we play this particular, I have just a couple notes here. Let me sell this track. I think a lot of the controls in Cubase, if you come over here and adjust, hold down the Shift key, this will give you kind of like a fine control. So let's say if we want to come here. So if I just move, adjust a parameter here. So let's say if we come here. So let's say we would do like 30-second notes. So again, we have kind of the depth. Now, if you wanted to, I know that you're in version 12, which is, you know, the modulators came in version 14, but if we wanted to come over, we could also, if you update it to later versions, we could come over here and just do kind of the modulators and have, which will give us kind of more control. So let's say, like here, if I wanted to just do maybe fine tuning. So now, like as we play, and we could have kind of more control. And we could adjust kind of our speed here. And you could come over here. So I know that's not in version 12, but you know, if you had 14 or 15, there's, you know, kind of a wealth of different types of modulators, which can give you kind of finer control over it than what you have built in. A lot of times when people are doing kind of the LFOs, it's kind of more extreme stuff. But, you know, consider maybe jumping up to take advantage of all the great modulators that started to be introduced in Cubase 14. All right, let me go back to... All right, I thought I saw a question from Alex B, but retracted the message. All right. Roland Stuff asks, hi Greg, when gluing audio events together as opposed to bouncing them together, you get a single event with lines top and bottom. What does that mean, please? Okay. Okay, so let me come over here. Let's drag a couple of audio events over. Okay, so let's say we have this. All right. So a lot of times when we could think of, we have events. Now an event is a single entity. All right. And when we have an event, we're going to have a lot of control so that we could, adjust not only just kind of like our fade in, we have our clip gain here that we could adjust accordingly. All right. So now when we glue multiple events together, they kind of go into almost like a container, and that container is called a part. So I'm going to come over here. Let's select these 4 events. And when I come over, I'm going to glue these together. I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key, which will glue all the events to the last one together. And then we see like these lines. Now, the question, when I often get this, is when people glue events together. And again, now it's a part. A part is a container of events. Okay, so now we have a container of events. People are like, where's my fade in? I could trim still, but my fade and my clip gain handles have disappeared. Why? Where did those go? Is often a question we get on live streams. So what we need to do is to just simply double click, and instead of going into the audio sample editor, we go into the part editor. And what this is going to allow us to do is to say, okay, now within the editor, I could come over here, and now I could adjust my clip gains here. I can make kind of more, I could copy parts. So let's say, okay, I just want to come over here. Let's trim this. Just take my snap off. So let's copy this event here. I want to do a fade out, a fade in. I need this event to go in the middle here, and then I need this event to end. So we could kind of do rearranging of the events quite easily. We could also just say, okay, let's come over and let's do a process. So I just want to reverse that one section within an event. So I could have multiple files within this particular container. Now I can just take this event and move this, and copy it multiple times if necessary. And then if we want to see multiple events all together within the same editor, we can say, oh, this one, I want these two to be reversed just as a variation. We could do that. So these have migrated from events into parts. Now, the question I often get now is like, how do I get a part back to an event status? So if we glue multiple events together, we take those events and join them together as a part. If we wanted to separate those, all we have to do is we'll separate this one. We go to the audio menu, and we will choose dissolve part. So once we choose dissolve part, it will now automatically have all those have now migrated back to their separate files, independent of each other, and those files are now back to events. So to take events and join them into a part, and you could also just go to your audio menu and say events to part, join them together, and now it's one entity that could be moving multiple files that have been meticulously edited together. And then if you want to split it out, if you did that accidentally just by gluing your parts together, thinking, okay, I could do that, but now I want my separate control. So again, you could double click to go into the part editor and be able to, edit your fade ins, fade outs, etc. So it's okay, let's just come over here, and we want that for our fade in. So at this point, when we want to go back to separate events, select the part, audio, dissolve part. So let me know if that's helpful for you. right, so Gareth says, I hope that everyone's learning a boatload. All right, so we see Kurt Rod says, Mr. Cubase. I just try to help people. All right, let's see if there's more questions that come in. All right, so Roland Stuff says, many thanks, Greg. I've had Cubase for a few years. I never knew about the part editing. One lives and learns. Yeah. It's some people, some people would use like part editing to do like comped vocals in the early days. So it kind of gives you, like, before we had lanes necessarily. So let's say if I'm in, let's see if I have this project open, my recent list. All right, let me just open it up real quick. So what a lot of people would do kind of in early days of doing comping, before it was kind of more streamlined, is you could see all of your takes here. Now you still have kind of your comping tool, but if the lanes are a little too small, what people would do here, let's see, is, where you had to kind of manually come over here and cut. So let's say if we select all of your takes, so people would manually kind of come over here and say, okay, these are my particular takes that I'm doing. So if you needed kind of a larger comping window, you could come over here. So this is how a lot of people would kind of start comping initially in early versions of Nuendo, so that you could now just come over here and choose different takes. I think the new comping paradigm is a little easier to work with, but people would go to parts to do that in earlier versions. All right. So you just see Roland Stuff just says, apologies for repeating an earlier question, Greg, but I think got missed. He's crossed back to live questions. Sorry if I missed it, and always ask questions if I just happen to miss one. All right, so we see Gerald Ely just saying, what's up, Club Cubasers? Happy Friday to y'all. He's still working. To y'all still working. He says he's retired with a big smiley face. I'll get there one day, but I do like my job. But we're glad you could join us, Gerald, from Martinez, California. All right, so we have George Joven asks, hi Greg, using audio to MIDI extraction, I get really low velocity values, same with volume. Controller curve, also the curve was not detailed, kind of squarish. Is that because of an uneven waveform? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. Let's say we'll do this bass part. Let me just revert this project. Okay, so say we'll just listen to it here. Just as a reference. So let's say we want to do, so I'm not sure if you're doing like drums or you're doing kind of more melodic material, but let's say we have this. I'm going to just, let's adjust. So let's go into Vari Audio, then the sample editor here. Do its analysis of it. And let's come here and we will choose to extract the MIDI. All right, so you could change the volume here to a fixed velocity or to dynamic velocity. You could also have a volume controller curve if you want. Generally, I do dynamic velocity, but we'll go ahead and let's come over. So we have that as MIDI. I want to, let's just add an instrument track. Let's do an instrument in Hallian 7. I think I would do electric bass instrument that we could use. Okay. All right, and I think sometimes depending on the MIDI, the instrument, let me just transpose this up. Okay, so now let's just take this track here. I think I'm getting some articulations. Let me put it on in bass sound, it has less articulations. Just so I would say that the level is fine with that. So, but you could always, come over. Let's say if we select all of the instruments, like all of the notes here, just a Command or Control A, you could always just raise the velocity proportionally for that. So, and now as you kind of play, you get so now let's see if I but it seems like the level is generally pretty good, but just check on now if you're doing like drums, you could just choose to not retain the original dynamics and put for a fixed value. All right, so you see I was extracting it for trumpet. Let's see if I have like something with brass in it. Yeah, I have like saxophone part. All right, didn't like that project. All right, older one. Okay, so say we want to take okay, so let's take this sax part here. Okay, and let's go into Very Audio. Okay. And let's load up an instrument track, let's say. Okay. Copy this, let's take up to our saxophone part here. So just kind of tweaking the sound a little bit here. And if we just so you could extract it directly to, you know, a fixed velocity level, but if you wanted to take the dynamics into account from the original track, you could do that as well. So, but it seems to kind of work pretty well, but let me know what you think. But that's kind of using, it's not a trumpet part, but saxophone part, but it should give you the idea. But you could still increase that overall just by selecting all of our MIDI notes again and coming to your velocity value. We can see that this would probably make it brighter sounding as well. All right, so play around with that a little more, see if it makes sense. All right, so we see Gareth turning out for bedtime. I'm not sure if I mentioned that earlier. All right, so we see Gerald Ely says, I thought I had a grasp on the chord pads, but I was watching earlier and Greg showed that there was so much more. I'll be changing my preferences. All right, so we see, Greg, how can we make custom sample collections in the media bay? So generally, you know, we could save kind of favorites folders. So I'm not sure if you want to, a lot of people want to come over here to the loops and samples and be able to make all of, like, you know, have this show up as the pretty icons. But generally these have gone through a lot of, they have, you know, tremendous amount of metadata, like tempo information. It has, you know, is this for jazz? Is it for salsa? Is it for country music? You know, is it an acoustic bass, a synth bass, an electric bass? You know, is it a bright bass, a mellow bass, flat wound strings, kind of all these metadata, what key is each of the songs in. If you have kind of custom folders, like a lot of times what I do is just kind of come over to the file browser, and let's say, okay, I know that I have within this particular folder, I'll say, okay, let's come here, let's go to, say, documents and say, okay, this is like my favorite sample folder here in audio. What I could do is right click and they'll say, okay, I want to take a particular folder, and we could right click on it and say add favorites, and we'll just say May 8th 2026. Turn my caps lock off. So when I want to go to a particular folder, I could just come here to favorites and say, okay, let's just come over to my May, you know, and I could just jump kind of right over there and just say, oh, here's one shots, and now I'm looking for my favorite snares. So you can make them to favorites, but if you want it to kind of be, you know, all organized like this, it's probably going to be a little more involved, and you'd have to kind of reach out to Steinberg to make sure that all of the criteria for sample content comes with it. But you can still save your favorites and easily recall them. All right, so we see Balsa joining you from Montenegro. Thanks for being online. Okay, so you see, all right, from Gerald Ely says, as a feature request, I would love to make any kind of chord and assign it to a chord pad. If possible, Cubase already does so much. It said, let me know if there's a particular chord that you can't do. But once you have the chord pads here, let's say in this project, I don't have a chord pad. If we just kind of click on the MIDI, I could double click here, and I'm just going to randomly lay my hand across the keyboard. And then I think that if we come over here, I could just play whatever chord. And so once I have the MIDI turned on here, and it will figure out the chord for you. So you don't, you know, so I just happen to play a major 7th, 9th, 13th chord. So, and I could say, okay, but I want that over E flat, if, you know, or D sharp if you want. So you could just physically play any chord in and modify it. But let me know if there's a particular chord that you can't voice. And obviously chord definitions can be very interpretive. You know, you could look at, you know, multiple people may look at the same notes, and, you know, you could see it on different Facebook memes and social media memes where it's like, what is this chord? I play these notes. You know, how would you define this chord? And someone may go, oh, it's a, you know, it's a D D major 13th chord, and someone's like, no, it's a D with a B and a bass, or something like that. So there could often be, like jazz musicians may spell chords differently than gospel musicians, who spell chords differently than country musicians, who spell chords differently than rock musicians or Baroque classical musicians. So, but let me know if there's particular chords that you can't get, but you could always try just to play the chord and click on the MIDI icon, and that will assign that particular chord to the pad right there. All right, so we see from Felix says, hi Greg, can you show your drum mixing workflow? So let me know if it's like for acoustic drums. I'll show like an acoustic thing. So let's take a look at it. Okay. All right, so let's say, all right, so I'll just kind of take all of my drums down. So let's go ahead and let me just click right here. All right. I'll just mute the bass for now. Okay, so if I was building like an acoustic drum mix, all right, stop a little. All right, so often, like most people, I would probably start on a kick. So here we're gonna have probably a sub kick. So I may start with like a kick mic and bring in. And again, you could check just to make sure that these two mics are in phase with each other. So if you wanted to, again, just kind of come to the channel, you can flip the phase and see if it sounds worse or better. All right, so let's go now to, so often like your bottom snare may give you a little more attack. And let's bring in your hi-hat. All right, now your toms may be just kind of picking up other sounds, maybe bleeding into it. So let's say we have overheads. And let's go ahead and pan these. Now, sometimes with overheads, if they're recorded well, we could just say, okay, I want to take these two overheads and I want to select these two. And I'm just going to hold down my Alt or Option plus Shift, and I could bring these two up together. And we have some room. So let's look at the other tracks here. All right. So some additional room mics. So we have several room mics here to choose from. And again, we could pan these. And let's say tambourine. And let's give it maybe just a little more emphasis on the sub kick. So now if we wanted to bring the volume down, I have these into a folder with group track. So that's how I would probably build something up and then add effects to the song as needed. But here we're getting a lot of kind of like the sound from the room mics. If we want to bring the bass in, see how that's sitting with the kick. So that'd be pretty good balance to kind of start with, I think, for approaching like a multi-track drum. Just kind of get the levels together like that. All right, so we see Sable Winters asks, how to use VST Connect for collaboration. Must others need to own Cubase for this? No, so the other person could download a free program for Mac and Windows. I think it's $4.99 if they want to do it on their iPad, and it's called VST Connect Performer. So when we come over, let me see if I have it in my doc here. Maybe not, so let's come over. All right, so just look under applications and we'll see VST Connect Performer. So the performer would download this program. Okay. And what you would do is start off and you go to your VST Cloud. So when you're recording in, so, you know, you just do that. And basically you control, so they have an audio interface. You come over here. We want to create a VST Connect. All right. All right, let me just free up a Q channel, Q mix here, sorry. So it's going to use part of your control room. So it's going to use a Q mix for that. So let's remove one of the Q mixes. All right, so we go to, and I'm using the Pro version so that I could demonstrate this, but okay. And you may get a little window here to just say, okay, maybe once we're done. So this is what it's going to kind of look like on your end. We could just say we want to check and repair the configuration. All right. All right, so now what you do is, all right, so we have the performer software over here. We have this is you, this is the performer, right? So you could see them, and you want to just kind of come right over here. You give them this number. I'm probably gonna break the space-time continuum, and then you'd see the key. So you'd say, okay, it's going to be 77585. So this is a one-time key. All right, and so at this point you could add an audio track using the VST Cloud. So you could say, okay, I want to create a performer track, and then basically as you do that, you're recording that person directly into your session. So the other person doesn't have to own Cubase, they just download VST Connect Performer, and then they could be tracking directly into your system for you.
Okay. So we see from Alex B. Ask, thank you for your answer. Yes, it's possible to add folders to favorites, but could it be organized without physical replacement of the samples using just Media Bay, please? So, if you tag stuff, so let's say if we're in Media Bay and we just come over to your file browser, we could say, okay, I'm looking on my users folder here, and I'm looking for files that have the word Vox. So we could just come over and type and look in particular folders. So if you do tagging of, your different samples, you can, just search globally in MediaBase. Sometimes it may be a little easier to kind of see over here. So you say, okay, I just want to look, like I'm looking in VST Sound for, let's say, a plugin preset for guitar. So let's say, okay, so now I can see all of my plugin presets for guitars that are available. I could come over and say, okay, I'm looking for like female vocals. I could just say, okay, I'm looking for, plugin presets, not for Femly. Let's try spelling correctly. And then you can say, okay, here's, so you could search, or you could say, okay, I want to search by date. I want to search for clean guitar, distorted guitar, and those could show up in any folder that you want. So if you do tagging, that's always good if you want to be able to find your presets and files later. All right, so we see Gerald Ely says, thanks, Greg. I'll try a tip. Could be some chord descriptions or twisting me up. Yeah, I had very detailed discussions on philosophy of chord naming with the developer who did it, who's retired, I believe. And how different types of musicians, label different types of chords. It's always interesting. All right, we see Gerald Ely's got 1 gallon of chocolate eclair ice cream from Michael Teams. Very generous. All right, we see Val from Vienna has just joined. Great to see you on. All right, so we see Val's asking, how long is the stream going today? Until we run out of questions. All right, so it looks like we might be at the end of questions. We'll see if Val has questions that he wants to ask since he's just joined. Glad you could join us from Vienna. Hope you're well. Okay, so we see from Val's question is, can we somehow link in the MIDI editor the pitchbend data to the pitch so it gets copied with the pitch? All right, so let's go take a look. All right, so let's say we have a synth bass patch here. All right, now I do some pitch bending. Okay, so let's go just record something. Sorry. All right, let me record. All right, so we recorded data. So now Pitchbend always has to kind of match the particular instrument that you're working with, because
Each instrument could have independent pitch bend settings of like how many semitones it goes up, how many semitones it goes down. So it could be an octave. A lot of instruments may be set to 2 semitones or a whole tone. So if we come over here, let's look at, in this particular patch, we have 7 up and 7 down. So if I use my pitch bend, I can... So basically a perfect fifth up, a perfect fifth down. All right, so when we go to edit pitch bend data, if we wanted it to actually be kind of in tune, so let's come over here, let's make this a little larger. We're going to select pitch bend. So let's make this taller. All right, so what we want to do when you do pitch bend, because this same data could work for 1 semitone, it could work for an octave, or in our case, 7 semitones. So we want to come over here to the pitch bend data and say, okay, our pitch bend range is set to 7 up and 7 down. So that's linked. It could be independent if you turn the link off. And now what we could do is show the pitch and show the semitones grid. So now that we look, we can see the grid for the semitone. So if I want to take this particular note and say, okay, we're going to do pitch bend there. And because a lot of times what would happen as you do pitch bend is always really easy to pitch bend and have it go a little bit and not have it be in tune. So you put a little pitch bend in and you're playing your track and like, why is that whole instrument a little flat or a little sharp? So one of the other things that we added, and I think this was in 11 or 12, is the ability to snap the pitch bend. So now when I draw in a pitch bend, it will automatically snap to one of the semitones for you. So I could come here, let's just enter in pitch bend data. I could say, let's move this and have that automatically snap to a tone. So let's add a different node here. And now we could say, okay, instead of this going down 3 semitones, I want that to go down 4. And I want this node to kind of go down and for it to go up. And we could put in another node in the center and have that go to 1 semitone flat. So now we could do all of our adjusting and have that snap so that when we do edit, that it's actually on pitch and not like 4 cents sharp or 6 cents flat. So make sure that you set the range to match the instrument. In our case with Hallian Sonic, and each instrument will have different pitch bend ranges, and then it's always a good idea to make sure that you have snap turned on. And then we could just adjust your pitch bend and have it snap so that's making, it has a musical correlation to what we're doing here, and it's not just out of tune. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Val. Okay, so we have a question from Alex B, who asks, is it possible to analyze audio file tempo without having tempo track changed? So what I would do if you wanted to do that, so let's say we have an audio file here. Okay, so at the top, we're going to have a tempo track. Okay, so if you wanted the tempo track to not be affected, one of the things you could do with the tempo track here is just say, okay, I want to duplicate the version. All right, so when we do a tempo detection, it's going to analyze. I'm going to go to my project menu, and we'll get to tempo track, and we'll do our tempo detection. So I could analyze that, and we see that it's now done our tempo detection. If I wanted to go back to where I was and have my, I totally screwed everything up, if I made a track version, we could have one track version that's with the tempo track, and we could go back to the original track version just for to indicate the tempo detection. So if we come here and we say, okay, I want to take that tempo detection and now come over to my audio menu, to advanced, to set definition from tempo. So now if I wanted this to play back at a completely different tempo, I could just say, okay, let's come over here. Let's go back to our original tempo. I could duplicate that version, and now I could draw in all sorts of tempo. So I could see my non-affected original tempo. I could see the tempo detected and what I've done, and I could always jump back and forth to any of the versions. So if you need to always be able to go back easily, you could just simply kind of utilize track versions in the tempo track. Let me know if that's helpful or doesn't make any sense. All right. Okay, so we see from Felix Umbach, do you save prior live drum settings, effects, and maybe compressors so you don't have to start by scratch every time or not? You can. So let's say if I wanted to come over here, I have all of my drums. All right, so let's go back to this. All right. So what I could do is I could select all of my tracks here. So I'm going to take all my drum tracks. All right. So let's try just the drum tracks here, and then I could say save track preset. So we'll say drums, we'll say May 8th. Okay, so let's say I completely mess everything up here. All right, and let's come back over here. Let's go to user presets, to track presets, to multi. Then I could just come right over here. Let's say if I was just kind of starting from scratch, then all of my drums can be just recalled as well. So you could just, if you select your multi drums, then you could save a multi-track preset and drag those over. So you always have kind of a starting off point. Okay, so you see with Val's question, it says, I mean like inside the MIDI event, like in the editor in the lower zone, when I want to copy the pitch map with the MIDI note. Okay, so let's go back over to our synth bass part. Sorry for misunderstanding. All right, so let's say we have our synth bass with all of our MIDI pitch bend information here. All right, so let me open up my pitch bend data at top. All right, so we have our MIDI pitch bend. Let's make this event just larger. Okay, so now I want to take these particular notes, and there's a little, if you want to copy the CCs,
And MIDI system common messages. There's a little icon here for auto select controllers. So let's say if I do that, when I select the events here and I move them over to here, I'm going to copy. Now you can see that all of the Pitchbend data has been copied over. So if I take these notes here and I move them here, hold down my Alt or Option key, then the Pitchbend data, all the MIDI CCs are kind of tied with the notes. So let me know if that's what you mean. Val, sorry for misunderstanding. All right, so we see Sable Winters says, can this VST Connect be used to replace typical in-person rehearsal, or must it be solely for recording tracks? It's mostly going to be for recording tracks, so it's not going to be like a live remote practice thing. It is going to be just a peer-to-peer connection, so you're only communicating directly with that one person. Some people could use it for live, but there is latency that's involved. That latency can vary depending on the physical distance, so if you're doing it with a next door neighbor versus someone in a different continent, and how all the internet service providers deal with uploading and downloading data, that may all, so I wouldn't say it's going to be, the intention is not for it to be like a real-time rehearsal, remote type of situation. There's too many variables, but when we do a peer-to-peer connection, we could kind of control all the latency within the system. So it's going to be more intended for like collaborative recording scenarios. Roland Stuff says, hi Greg, I'm looking for a 61 key remote with built-in pads, control faders, knobs, pitch bend, modulator, so everything all in one unit. Any recommendations maybe, please? Thanks. I'm using the Nectar P4, which I've had, I think I got it right when my son was born, so I may have had it for 13 years. Still works every day. I kind of personally, I think the Arturia controllers look really cool. I think there's the new Novations that look quite nice to me. Like it depends on if you're like really picky with the action. So some controllers, and and it's just like an instrument. If you're a guitar player or a saxophone player, bassist, and as soon as you touch an instrument, you're like, no. That's not me. I don't like the feel of that, and I'm never going to like it. So I always suggest like going to a store and actually just trying like how you like the feel of the controllers. So a lot of the Native Instruments controllers are very popular. They could be very expensive, so sometimes you get a synthesizer for the same amount of money as a controller. With kind of similar functions, and maybe the keys will light up for stuff if you're using Native Instruments, but I try not to personally get into closed ecosystems so much. Like, as someone who's gone through a lot of ecosystems in the past where the ecosystems disappear. So, just having something that's not reliant on a software layer is a good thing, I think, so that, you could do a lot of the mapping stuff in Cubase very effectively. But, check out the Arturia, Novation, Native Instruments popular, probably a little more expensive, but, we now know that Native Instruments was acquired today, the announcement that they're being acquired by InMusic, so which also they make the Akai controllers. So that could be interesting, or it could, there's a lot of variables that could happen with that. I personally like the controller I have my eye on for sale is maybe the Arturia one, personally, but I haven't bought it. But my Nectar works every day as well. So through 6 or 7 computers, my Nectar still shows up and works every day. So I have no complaints with that.
Or you see John Costigan says it's time to go apply what I've learned. Thanks and have a great weekend, everyone. You too, John. Thanks for joining us on the live stream. All right, Gerald Ely says Pitchbend semitones and their tip I need. See Jazz Dude sharing a sound designer for beginners. How to remove noise and save bad recordings is probably the Robert Dudzik. So wonderful, incredible sound designer, great guy. Maybe we'll have him as a special guest on Zoom coming up. All right, so we see from Alex B says, what is a workaround using mixed console snapshots? All right, so if we're doing like mixed console snapshots, let me just revert this. I'm not sure if it's a workaround or something else, or just how to use mixed console snapshots. But let's say I like mixed console snapshots because sometimes I find that I may get better results. Like sometimes you just kind of keep going down like a dark path of like, and it's just getting worse and worse, and you're like, oh, if I change this one thing it'll be better, and then maybe if I change this, if I change that, and we've probably all been there in our production process, and then you realize like, oh, I saved and now I have like so much weird stuff going on with my particular project. So when we want to come over, let's say the cool thing that I like about mixed console snapshots is that we can just have the ability to say, okay, so let's come over here. All right, so let's say I'm working on my mixer. So let's say, okay, I think I may have something that's kind of interesting here. All right, so what I could do is just come over and take a snapshot of it. Now let's say, okay, I want to completely start from scratch. So I could take all these tracks, do a quick control, bring these all down. All right, so now I'm coming here. All right, so now what I could do is take a snapshot. And let's say I want to take another snapshot, and this time I want to put on my inspector on the folder with group channels, I want to put on my envelope shaper. And now I could take a third snapshot. All right, so let's say I have all of my drum channels selected. I can come over here, we'll go to our mixed console snapshot recall settings. So I'm going to say just for selected channels. And now what I could do is come over and say, let's recall snapshot 1. Let's recall snapshot 2. And let's recall snapshot 3, where we put on the envelope shaper. And we could choose not to show that again. So what I could do is just try out different mixes and do this before we have automation on like processing. And at this point, I could take it all down and go right back to where I was, take a snapshot, start with something completely fresh, and just try different ideas and be able to recall as we're building up a mix. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Alex. All right. See, Tim Weinheimer just says Club Cubase is a great community, great people. All right, so Alex just says, yes, thanks a lot for your answer on tempo detection, Greg, very helpful. All right, Soul Sound Official asks, what is the best way to program different toms in Groove Agent for different hits? So if it's actually like kind of programming them, let's say if we come up, we have a bunch of drum tracks up here. So if it's like acoustic agent, all right, so let's say we build a basic pattern here. So let me just... All right, we'll build it within Groove Agent itself. Okay, so we'll come over to our player and let's give it 32 steps. Okay, so I'm just going to expand this. Okay, so let's say I'm just coming over here, we'll do basic. All right, so let's say we'll... All right, so let's say we're doing all right, so, you know, kind of programming toms. So sometimes, you know, make sure that like your toms aren't, you know, in a way of like your kick and snare. So let's say if I come over here and we just do a... So you can see that the toms may stand out that maybe don't happen when like kicks and snares are going on. They could kind of speak a little more and can be kind of heard a little bit. And, you know, I have like one of my friends who's, you know, worked for Stevie Wonder for decades. He's like the funkiest drummer in the world. And he's always like, you know, drummers have 4 limbs and his left hand is like his pinky is kick, his ring finger is his snare, and he's doing hi-hats with his middle finger and toms with his index finger. And he's like, drummers have 4 fingers, so he tries to only have to be authentic. If you're trying to go for like an authentic drum toms, you know, it's like make sure that you don't have 6 sounds going on at once. Like, it's a drummer with 3 arms. If you're doing like an R&B thing, you could probably get around with it, but if you get away with it, but if you're doing more of, particular, trying to be very authentic patterns, then, try to limit your polyphony to 4 notes, because you only have, generally drummers will have 4 limbs to work with. So let me know if that's helpful or not. All right, so we see from Val, it says, that link with the CC auto select controllers thing. Every day you learn something new about Cubase. That's probably been in there since version 2 on Windows or something, decades. But he says, crazy that helps so much. Thanks, Greg. So thanks for the clarification. All right, you see kind words from Michael Team. Says, yes, Cubase community is a cohesive group of music makers. We share a great DAW and a great instructor in Jazz Dudes. Cubase Discord, no other DAW makers. Great set of resources. Thank you for the kind words. All right. All right, you see Roland Stuff says, thanks for sharing your thoughts on all-in-one controllers, Greg. Really helpful. I totally take your point about getting your hands on it before buying. Yeah. Some controllers I touch and I'm like, ugh. Yeah, and I'm not like I have like a really picky piano controller in my studio for those people. So I have like a old Roland A80, which has like really kind of very authentic piano action. So if I have piano snob people that come over, they're totally comfortable with that. So. You see Tim Weinheimer loves his Arteria MIDI controllers. All right, so Alex just says, absolutely helpful. Thanks so much. All right, so Val just says, are there actual automation lanes or versions? Always hard to compare those. So if you have, if it's kind of dealing with the snapshots, the snapshots won't really, it'll keep the existing like volume automation, but if you have automation on plugins, and let's say, okay, I automated this EQ in this plugin and this snapshot doesn't have that plugin to do it, you'll get a warning message that particular parameter may not translate accurately if you switched it to a different EQ, because it's automating a parameter in a plugin. It's not the EQ3 frequency that, even if different plugins have the same like parameter, but that automation parameter is tied to the particular order of how that parameter appears in the plugin. So we see Gerald Ely about the Novation Launch Key controller. Integrates with Cubase really well. It has a button for the undo function. Use that a lot. So. All right, we'll see how, I think we're at the end of questions. We'll see if there's any other questions that kind of sneak in. Thank you for all the questions from everyone. Appreciate it, and I hope that everyone's learned some new tips and tricks. So one quick programming note again, next Friday we won't have a live stream, but we will on Tuesday, and the following Tuesday I'll remind everyone again on Tuesday's live stream, but just a quick heads up. So I won't have to spend my Friday night doing an index, so I'll just do some Dorco training for school system in the United States here. All right. Thank you for the kind words, Capital Razor. Appreciate it. Give it another 30 seconds or so, see if anyone else pops in with another question. If not, we could wrap up a little early. There's usually about a 20-second delay from when I talk to when you guys hear. All right, well, it looks like we are out of questions. Let me see. All right, so Gerald Ely just says, great job as always, Greg. Thanks for the indexes. All right, Sable is wondering if anyone knows anything about Sonobus for rehearsal. So I'm not familiar with it. Michael Graybill asks, is there a way to get MIDI tracks to default to use ramp instead of jump? Thanks. All right, so let's do new project. And this is for controller lanes. Okay, so let's just okay, so right now I have it set to ramp, and let me do a new project again. I'll do a different instrument. So it may just stick. So let's come over here. So it's still on ramp. Let's see if I switch this to step. If when I do a new project, it switches over to step. So it looks like it just keeps the last setting, seems to stick. So let me know if you have different behavior, but it seems like whatever the last setting is. So maybe if you're starting with a template, your template has it on ramp instead of step. But it seems like that particular setting is sticking when opening a new project. All right, Robert Dudzik, the sound designer, he just posted a new video on using Spectral Layers 12, so everyone should check that out. All right. Well, I think we are out of questions. I want to thank again everyone for all of the great questions. Hope that everyone's learned something. If you have, make sure you hit the like button. Tell other people about the live streams. But always grateful to be part of such a wonderful community. And with that, I want everyone to stay safe and healthy over the weekend. And we'll see everyone back on Tuesday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Thank you so much, and goodbye.